Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha, and I'm here with our family of seekers, and we're studying the Bhagavad Gita, this ancient yogic wisdom text. We started at chapter 1 back in August of 2024, and now we're here. We're coming up to our year anniversary, but we just finished the fifth chapter. Which, by the way, is like a third of the way through our journey. So we're about a third of the way through our journey, and by text, by the amount of verses that there are in the Gita. And we are starting the sixth chapter today. And the sixth chapter is a really fun and deep one, as they all are. But this is nice. This one's called Dhyana Yoga, and that's the yoga of meditation. And in this chapter, we're going to talk a lot about the mind. And we're going to talk a lot about meditation, and we're going to talk about how the mind can be an obstacle to meditation. And this chapter, this Ashtanga Yoga, is a lot. Many of us, like I know I've taken oh my gosh, so many yoga teacher trainings. I think I have like 1,200 hours worth of yoga teacher trainings. But this eight-limb system of Ashtanga Yoga is typically the process that you study in like a yoga teacher training. So maybe many of you will be a little bit familiar with it if you have some like asana, some of the like physical practice of yoga, some of that experience, because this kind of philosophy is behind that. Right? So what's going to happen in this chapter is Krishna's again going to start more and more shift the focus inwards. Right? So after guiding Arjuna through action without attachment and the deeper meanings of renunciation, we've seen him do that in the previous chapters, right? He's now going to begin to reveal the inner landscape of the spiritual practice. So what it means to turn within. So that's what this chapter, it's going to walk us through this meditative process, right? Not just as a technique, but as a way of life. So it's an 8-limb process, and those 8 limbs aren't like deeply described in the Gita. They're more deeply described in like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is also a wonderful text. But just for the purpose of kind of understanding them a little bit, we'll go into it a little bit today. In fact, we'll go into it a little bit more than it's described in the Gita, just so that when we say 8-limb path, you have kind of an idea of what we're talking about here. So we'll go into that a little bit. But it starts with steadying our actions and desires, right? And then it gradually moves towards cultivating stillness and presence, and ultimately a deep connection with Source. So he goes through it all. He teaches the yogi how to sit, how to control the mind, and then how one becomes absorbed in the divine. But what's especially powerful in this path is that it doesn't end in solitude. It ends in connection. And that's what we should be seeing about all of these paths that we've talked about, is that they all are ultimately leading to that same place, which is connection with Source. And Krishna is revealing that the highest yogi is not the one who withdraws from the world completely, but one who reunites or unites their hearts in this devotional meditation. And we've talked about that theme a lot too. It's not about dry renunciation. It's about renouncing desires of the world and connecting to something higher. Okay, so I'll just give you an overview of this chapter. I'm going to share my screen real quick because I just want to kind of show you guys. Oh, wrong one. Okay. I want to show you guys where we're going in this chapter. This is just kind of like a roadmap to this chapter. If you're a person that likes information kind of displayed this way, and you can look at the screen. So the first 9 verses is we're going to talk about the steps needed before one can renounce worldly life and focus on meditation. So these are like the preliminary steps. He's going to describe how a yogi gradually advances through this disciplined action and internal purification. And then in verses 10 through 30, we're going to go through the progressive realizations of God. Okay, starting with Brahman, like the impersonal spiritual reality. We've touched on that a little bit. We touched on these conceptions a little bit. We will a lot more as we go through the Gita. But for those of you that are familiar with these even a little bit, you can kind of see the progression here of this chapter. So we'll talk about how God is everywhere, God is in everything. We'll talk about how God is in the heart, and then we'll talk about the personal form of the Supreme. So these are just like different conceptions of God. And then as we kind of start to close the chapter here, Krishna is going to talk about the mind. And we're going to learn so much about the mind in this chapter and how to control it. And ultimately, because the mind is our biggest obstacle to connecting with the source, right? The mind is so restless. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere. And it's sometimes even like the calibration is off. Right? It doesn't even work quite correctly. Like things that we think are good for us are actually bad for us. And then the opposite is true. So we're going to talk a lot about how to kind of curb this and tame this mind so that it can be our friend and not work against us. And that's kind of what the concluding sections here are about. Right? With the final section here, the last two verses, Krishna's going to talk about how among all yogis, the one who fixes his mind on them with devotion is the topmost. Okay, so this is kind of where we're going. And I'll stop sharing my screen that's kind of just an overview of the chapter. And ultimately, Krishna is going to reveal that Bhakti Yoga is the highest and most complete path. And this will set the stage for chapter 7, where we're going next. And that's there he'll unfold the process of devotional service and more fully. And he'll describe this alternative but more direct way of attaining perfection through this loving connection with him. Okay, so with that, let's get right into it. We're going to do 4 verses today. And I'll share my screen again, and I'll go back to the Veda base here. And Stella, if you could read the first text for us.
Sure. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "One who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty."
Okay, great. Thank you. So more and more, Krishna's changed this definition of renunciation to not just renouncing externally, but more so renouncing internally, right? Renouncing our internal desires, our internal attachments. That's the real renunciate. And not just the one who walks away from their responsibilities, right? Or doesn't work or avoids everyday life. That's not renunciation. It's you could still be working in the world. In fact, you will likely still be working in the world, but internally, you'll be renounced. Right? They still do what needs to be done. They take care of their duties. They're responsible, right? But they don't get attached to the results. So they're not working for praise or money or success. They're renounced from those things. They do it because it's the right thing to do. It's their duty, and they offer it to something higher. So in this verse, there's this little line at the end, you may remember it talks about not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. That's just referring to the lighting of the fire is one of the duties that the Brahmanas were responsible for performing fire sacrifices. And so that's what that line refers. So it's again just saying that you're not a real Brahmana if you just neglect your duties. You have to perform your duties, but the renunciation happens internally. So, just I guess another example that we can like more like modern day example here would be like, an athlete who's working really hard to win a championship. And they've been dreaming of this like their whole lives. They're just so focused on winning this championship. So clearly their motivation here is the fruit of their effort, right? That external reward. That's their meditation. So and this is the case where they're taking shelter in the result, not the process. Okay, the Bhagavad Gita, it's not against achievement itself. He's not saying that, Krishna's not saying that we shouldn't pursue our goals. He's just saying that the problem arises when the external achievement is our only motivation. Okay, the problem arises when the external achievement is our only motivation. Because if we're driven solely by the outcome, we may get the trophy, but we don't necessarily grow spiritually through it, which is ultimately the purpose of this whole life, right? So we're just kind of missing the point, and we're getting kind of caught in the weeds. Right? We're not getting closer to God just by winning something in the material world. In fact, it could make us more of a jerk. Right? So we we want to shift more towards this taking shelter of the process, taking shelter of of giving our work, to something higher than ourselves. Right? So juxtaposed to this, like the complete opposite of this would be like a very pure devotee who might visualize success or accomplishments, but it's something they offer to Krishna, right? It's not about personal gain. It's all just about devotional service. That's like a high goal. That's like where we ultimately want to get. We're completely unattached to it for ourselves, and we're just doing it as a loving service to God. Okay? But a karma yogi, like we've been talking about in all these chapters, they're focused on detachment. Okay, not from action, but they're trying not to be attached to the results. Right? And as we talked about in text 511, their goal is purification. Their goal is purification to stop this bodily identification, right? So to do that, they work as an offering, and in this way, they don't become bound by their work. Bound meaning furthering this understanding that they're or this false narrative that they're the body, right? Just overly identifying with the body, and they become bound by this material existence. So here, Krishna is saying that in the beginning, a yogi's job is to perform their prescribed duties, not to renounce work altogether. Right? So to do what you're meant to do, simply because it's your responsibility. And if you can do that without being attached to the results, without getting caught up in all these material temptations and pulled under by them, right? In that way, you're renunciant, right? And that way, you're a sannyasi and a yogi. You're a yogi because you're acting, you're a sannyasi because you're detached internally. And he's telling us that at the beginning, that's what we should be doing. Someone who's doing that, who's letting go of their selfish desire and working with the intention of serving divinity, that person is both a sannyasi and a yogi. Okay, so again, sannyasi means disconnection from the material, and yogi means connection with the spiritual. And when they come together in a person, who acts without attachment and offers everything to God, that's kind of the integration that Krishna is describing here. Okay, and he's going to unpack that more in the next verse. But this is a theme. It kind of sounds similar to what we've been talking about in all of these chapters. It is that real renunciation is inside, and it's not walking away from your duties. Okay, so let's move on to 6.2, unless anybody wants to share anything. Okay, we'll move on to 6.2. Whenever you're ready, Stella.
What is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. O son of Pandu, for one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification.
Thank you. So this is kind of similar to, we've kind of heard something along the same lines in chapter 5, where he talks about the goal is the same. Right? So here Krishna is saying that yoga, spiritual connection, and sannyasi, renunciation, again, lead to the same goal. He's saying that, but he's actually saying that they're connected at their core, right? He's saying if we still have strong desires for worldly enjoyment, we can't be true yogis. And why is that? Because you can't genuinely connect with the divine while you're deeply tangled in things that pull you away from him. It's like you're driving on your road to your final destination, right? But you're constantly stopping, to see the sights or to taste the ice cream, and because of that, you just never make it there, right? It's just constantly distracting you from investing your time, your energy, your consciousness in connection with source, right? Because you're just kind of distracted by everything going on around you. So what it's saying here is that you have to have both. You have to have detachment from worldly enjoyment to really have this pure connection with source. Right? They're important together. It's like if you try to light a fire to get rid of the darkness, you can't remove the darkness without lighting the fire, right? But once you do, the darkness naturally fades away. So they go hand in hand. And that's what he's saying here is that this detachment from the world and attachment to spirit are integral, are like tied together. Right? And therefore this more detached you are from the world, the easier it will be to connect with source. And naturally, this is the beautiful thing about bhakti, the more connected you are with source, just naturally the less connected or the less attached you'll be to worldly desires because they just won't lure you as much. They just won't be as attractive because you're just so immersed in something that's giving you so much more substantial and sustainable joy. Right? And that's what he's saying here. You know, true detachment naturally leads to a deeper connection. If someone is sincerely on the spiritual path, there will be a shift in desires. And it might happen slowly over time, and it likely will happen slowly over time, but it will happen if you're sincerely on the spiritual path. You know, your desires will change from seeking enjoyment just for yourself, you know, just the latest entertainment or, you know, excitement. You know, that will change to wanting to live in selfless service and devotion. That's what you'll be more attracted to if you're sincerely practicing spiritual life. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But there should be a gradual loosening of the grip that selfish pleasures have on you. On the flip side, if someone claims to be spiritual, but is still fully absorbed in immoral or self-centered pleasures, Krishna would say that's not true yoga. You know, it's not rooted in genuine sincerity. And everybody's going to be different too, right? We can't look at somebody and say, okay, well, they're really self-centered, so they're not making progress because we don't really know where they started, right? We're all starting at different places. We're all coming into this with with our own experiences from our previous lives, right? So we can't really look at other people and say, oh, this is working on them or it's not. We can't really be the judge of that because we all started at different places and we're all moving at different paces. So but the point is, we should be moving. Even if that's at a snail's pace, we should be moving less towards this self-centered I, ego, you know, way of living and more towards selfless service, more connected to source. Did somebody raise their hand? Yes. Is that Lisa? Your hair looks different, Lisa. It's very nice.
Thank you. Stay tuned for changes, right, with hairstyle. I just wanted to say, as you were speaking, I was reminded of the Christian passage that says, seek ye first the kingdom, and all things are added. And it's just exactly what you're saying. It's not saying that you're not going to be concerned with your duties and responsibilities in the world, but it is inviting us to prioritize that which is most important, which is our inward journey. So it's saying if you ask, seek, and knock, with that as your priority, you'll receive. And it's like those three things mean ask, right? If you put
Hmm.
them together, they mean ask. And so once we move the focus off the material and move it to spirit, then we can have a great life. Like when we've dedicated and devoted ourselves to spirit, again, it's its own reward. Spirit is seeking to have that love relationship with us in the heart. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I love when you tie in things from different traditions or paths. It's it's uncanny how similar these things are. My husband
Mm.
listens to this podcast and he's Catholic, and afterwards he's always like, "Oh yeah, we have the same thing," or it's pretty much yeah,
Mhm.
they get it's so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that brings us to our last point here that renunciation isn't about running away from your responsibilities just because life feels hard or overwhelming. Some of us try to fake it, when we're overwhelmed or, like, okay, I don't care. I'm just going to let that go. I don't care. But really you do care, and that's not really renunciation because you're still attached internally. But renunciation, it's meant for those who have grown deeper inside and realize that the usual things that the world offers, like success, comfort, or approval, simply doesn't satisfy. It simply doesn't satisfy the heart anymore. So they're searching for something that's lasting, something that's truly meaningful. That's when somebody's really ready to renounce externally. And the misconception here is that many think that renunciation means quitting your job or leaving your family or dropping all your duties. But here's the catch. If you give up your responsibilities without letting go of these inner cravings and attachments, you might just become irresponsible or even hypocritical, right? Because those desires are still pulling the strings. You're still kind of controlled by these desires, these worldly desires, and that's okay. But just don't renunciate before you're actually ready, or it can backfire on you. So this true renunciation, it happens on the inside. It means letting go of the desires and the attachments, even while continuing your daily tasks and fulfilling your roles. So when you come into spiritual life, it's not like, oh, I could quit my job, or, I did that. I did that when I came into spiritual life. And it does actually make things harder when you're not ready for it, because you have all these attachments that when you try to prematurely let things go, your mind is restless, right? Your mind is worried about how am I gonna, make an income? How am I gonna do this? What's going on with, like, your mind is still in it. So we have to continue to do our duties and purify ourselves until we're ready, until it's actually time. And this was Arjuna's experience. In the Gita, the whole premise, the whole conversation that's going on is that Arjuna thought that by walking away from the battlefield, that was renunciation. But it wasn't, right? It wasn't because he was so attached, so spiritually attached, right? It was just because he didn't want to face the harsh reality of fighting his own relatives. He was actually very attached materially. So just quitting his duty wouldn't have helped him grow spiritually. What truly helped was learning to perform his duties with a heart free from selfish desires, right? Doing his work as an offering with a spirit of selfless service. And that's the real path of renunciation, when we can shift from working for our own pleasure to working for Krishna's pleasure. Okay, that's when renunciation and yoga truly become one. Renunciation and yoga, meaning acting in this world, right? That's when they truly become one. And Krishna will dive even deeper into this idea in the next couple of verses. We'll move on to 6:3. Whenever you're ready, Stella.
For one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means.
This is a fun verse. This is where we're really going to start to kind of dive into Ashtanga a little bit. Because that's what this verse is doing. He's right. Krishna's showing us a step-by-step spiritual journey here. So he's saying that in the beginning, spiritual progress actually comes through action, right? Doing your work with the right mindset and intention helps you grow. And so there's these 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. The first 4 limbs are kind of in this category. They're kind of for this beginner, so to speak, this beginner spiritualist who's in that process, who needs to purify themselves, right? And that's what these first 4 limbs are. They help with that purification so that it can prepare us for the final 4 steps, 4 limbs of this Ashtanga Yoga practice, which is geared more towards meditation and connection with source, right? Turning inwards. But we can't really do that until we've purified the mind, right? We can't really do that until our heart is purified. Because at the beginning, we're just not pure enough to renounce the work. We're just too attached, right? We have all these desires. One can only really renounce work at the advanced stage. So the beautiful thing about this practice is, though, that the journey can start right where you are, right? These first 4 limbs of yoga are all about creating a strong and grounded foundation, even while we're living in this material world. Okay, so I'm going to go over these first four limbs. And like I said, I'm going to go over them in a little more detail than it does in the Gita. This is more based off of like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And I'm just going to kind of gloss over them so that we can see what they are and how they could help us. And yeah, okay, so the first one is called, here, I'm going to pull up my sheet again. For those of you that like a visual, just because there's so much going on here. Um, this is my visual for the eight limbs. So this first one we're going to talk about is these yamas. Okay, and oh, give me just 1 second. What's going on here? Sorry. Okay. So the first one we're talking about is these yamas, and these are like your moral compass, right? Like guidelines for how you relate to others in the world around you. So we can think about it like, don't be a jerk, don't lie, don't take what's not yours, don't let desire run your life. So the first one that you see here, this ahimsa, this is nonviolence. Okay, this means not causing harm, right? Not only physically, but also through our words and thoughts. It's about cultivating kindness and compassion in our interactions, including how we speak to ourselves, right? This ahimsa is super important. I was talking to one of my mentors the other day, and I was kind of talking him through something, just a situation with somebody that I needed to kind of come through. And he said to me, ahimsa is the highest practice. Ahimsa is the highest practice. So we have to be really careful, or the highest principle. Ahimsa is the highest principle. We have to be really careful to not cause harm to others, not just physically, but in our words and thoughts, right? Because we can get so entangled that way. So we really want to send those love vibrations out, right? Choose your words carefully, right? Catch yourself when you're being judgmental or angry. Avoid gossip and be careful about your internal narrative to yourself, right? What are we telling ourselves about ourselves, right? This ahimsa, this nonviolence, it's critical. Okay, this next one is truthfulness. And that's just about being honest and authentic with ourselves and with others. It means sharing our true feelings and thoughts instead of pretending or hiding. Now, in this, we still have to remember that nonviolence is an even higher principle, right? So we don't want to tell somebody like, if they, sometimes if somebody's like, how do I look in this? And they really don't look good, but there's like nothing they can do about it because you're out in public, and it's like, it's not the time to tell them, oh, you look terrible, right? We want to try to, this nonviolent principle is higher. So we have to be careful too about our truthfulness and when and why we're doing it. But generally, we want to say how we feel in a respectful way instead of just agreeing to avoid conflict, or, we want to be honest about our limits and our needs rather than overcommitting. So and while we're doing this, again, we're also practicing this nonviolence. So we're doing this in a compassionate and loving way, both to ourselves and to others. Okay, this next one, non-stealing. Not taking anything that isn't freely given to us. And this is nice too, because it includes not just physical things, but also time, energy, or attention from others. Right? So we can respect others' times by not interrupting or dominating conversations. Right? Or anybody ever borrowed anything without asking and then failed to return it? So some of these are like, it's easy to say, oh, I don't steal, that doesn't apply to me. But it's like, it's on such a, if we really zoom in, it's like, yeah, we actually do a lot of these things without really even thinking about it. So it's just getting super intentional and conscious of these things, giving credit when you use someone else's ideas. This idea of non-stealing, it could go very far. Okay, next one is moderation. This is it's about moderation and self-control. Okay, so we're not slaves to our impulses or cravings. And this helps us find balance and clear-headedness. Okay, so here, moderation, limiting binge watching or scrolling on social media to avoid distraction or burnout. Right? Choosing to eat mindfully. rather than impulsively or excessively. Balancing work, rest, and play without overdoing any one thing. So this moderation. And the last one here is non-possessiveness. Okay, so letting go of attachment to possessions, outcomes, or comparisons. Okay, so it's about freedom from clinginess and the stress of wanting more. So to practice this here, we can practice gratitude for what we have, right? Instead of focusing on what we don't. We can avoid comparisons. Right? We can trust that we don't need to control everything or hold on tightly to people or things. Okay, so these are the first, these are called the yamas. This is the first limb, right? And these guidelines, they just help us to be more aware, more compassionate, you know, and they're a foundation that supports deeper yoga practice and spiritual growth. So that's like where you start in the Ashtanga practice, right? The Ashtanga path, it's like a path of its own. It has these 8 limbs, and the first 4 limbs really help you to kind of control your mind and stop being a jerk, right? To control your mind. And that's the process. These first 4 limbs. And this is what Krishna is saying in these verses is these first 4 limbs, better that you work in the world, better that you do your duty, and better that you purify yourself by sincerely practicing these 4 limbs. And then once you do that, the last 4 limbs, which we'll kind of gloss over as well, you can do it when you're renounced. You know, you start to turn inwards, but you have to be ready for it first. You have to be ready for it first. And when we see all of these criteria, you know, when we see all of this, it helps us to see, okay, yeah, I'm not to the point of renunciation, right? Even if you're not stealing a candy bar from the gas station, you're probably interrupting somebody in a conversation, right? And stealing their time or energy. So that's these yamas. Does anybody want to say anything about them before we move on to the niyamas? And I'm purposely going over this fast because these are not technically like really talked about a lot in the Gita, but I think that they're useful and I think it helps to give us a bigger context of the Ashtanga yoga practice. So I just wanted to kind of introduce them, I guess.
Well, I think it's important, and I appreciate the work as always around it. But one of the questions that came up on a call was, why does this keep happening to me? And I think that by highlighting these practices and how you're actually using them in the world, like you just gave the example about interrupting or taking people's time or taking people's energy, well, that's generating karma and keeping you in the same cycle. And if you don't become conscious of it on a very practical level, then you won't understand, quote unquote, how you keep creating the same life over and over. So the belief that the work isn't working versus you're not working the work.
Wow, that's such a beautiful connection. Really like that. Thank you. And
Mhm. Mm.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly why we study these things and not just on the surface level, but we really try to go deep, right, and into what actually is nonviolence. Because we all probably do this every day without noticing it. So it just helps us just kind of bring out some awareness, right? Turn around that underbelly of that rock and see what's actually there. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so the next ones are these niyamas. These niyamas. These niyamas it's more about how I take care of myself on the inside. So where the yamas are about kind of relating with others, the niyamas are more about your personal inner discipline. It's how you take responsibility for your own growth and well-being. So there's there's how many yamas are there here? 6? 5? Five niyamas. So we start with cleanliness, right? Cleanliness. This means purity, right? Not just physically, again. This is so nice how all of these, it's like on the physical level, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm this. But then when you really dive deep into it, you look at deeper levels, you see where maybe you could improve a little bit, right? Like our habits, our thoughts, our environments. It's about creating space for clarity and peace. Okay, so maybe keeping your living and your working space tidy, to support mental calm. That's important, right? Our environment, because that affects our consciousness. Being mindful about what we eat, what we watch, what we consume energetically. How long do you have the news on every day? How long are you consuming this, conflict between Elon Musk and Donald Trump? It's
Ah,
like, what are you feeding yourself consciously? So, because it's affecting you energetically, not to not be aware, but at the same time, be mindful of what we're kind of immersing ourselves in. Letting go of negative thoughts, patterns, toxic relationships that clutter your mind. So this is cleanliness. The next one is contentment. Okay, being at peace with what you have, who you are, where you are, rather than constantly chasing more. And that's like the rajasic mindset, right? This is trying to get out of this rajasic mindset and get to that more sattvic plane where that cleanliness is. And so we can take a deep breath, right? We can feel grateful for this moment, even if everything isn't perfect. We can let go of the pressure to keep up with ourselves or prove or keep up with others or prove ourselves, right? And we can choose to focus on what's going right rather than what's missing. So this is just a shift in consciousness. Just like Lisa said, when we're constantly chasing more, we're going to get bound, right? When there's going to be no transcendence when we're constantly chasing more in this material world. We're just on that hamster wheel. It's going around and around and around. So we have to get to this place of contentment. Okay, and then discipline, tapas. Now this is your inner fire. It's the willingness to show up with dedication and effort, especially when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. So this in our spiritual practice, our spiritual practice takes a lot of discipline. We wake up, some of us chant, some of you come on this call, that takes discipline. So you probably don't feel like it every time, but you do it. You do it. And that's this discipline that's required. You have a hard conversation instead of avoiding it. You resist the pool of distraction and you choose what nourishes your soul. This takes discipline. So we just cultivate that. Self-study. Self-study. This means studying yourself and the sacred wisdom. It includes this introspection, this journaling, this reading spiritual texts, learning from life. So you become a little bit introspective about your life, about your day, and you notice where you reacted, where you stayed centered. You read some sacred texts, the Gita. You apply the teachings to your life. You're reflecting, you're introspective. What's triggering me? What can I learn from these experiences? And this is self-study. And then this last one is surrender to the divine. Right? So it means offering yourself to a higher power. It's about trusting that you don't have control over everything and that there's something that's guiding your path. Okay, so saying a simple prayer before making a big decision or starting your day. I do this every time before the podcast. So just to get out of this me mentality, and allow yourself to be used more as an instrument. Letting go of the need to have all the answers.
mhm.
Rest in this trust. And then seeing your work, your service, your relationships as offerings rather than burdens. Just changing the mindset around that. This has helped me a lot with taking care of my baby. Sometimes when I'm just like over it, it's like coming back to this, like, this is my service. Just that shift in consciousness, it makes it like joyful, right? Instead of like, oh, this is such a pain that I have to, wake up in the middle of the night and feed her. It's like I get to do this. This is my service. I'm so fortunate to have this service, this connection to divinity. So these niyamas, these are like our emotional and our spiritual hygiene. That's what these niyamas are. Okay, so this is just the first two branches of this 8-limb Ashtanga practice. Right? So it's really purifying yourself. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot in this chapter. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually. I have this beautiful book for chapter 6. It's called something about the mind, but it's like all these ways to work with our mind so that we can get it back under control, right? Because it could be wild and it can pull us in so many directions. But we want to train the mind to work for us instead of against us. And we're going to learn a lot of strategies for that in this chapter. So that's the first two. That's just the first two. Then when we get to the second two, asana, many of us know this asana. This is like what we practice in the West, this yoga practice that you see. You know, you have all these yoga studios and they're practicing this asana, which is great, which is beautiful. Because a lot of people don't have any training in the first two limbs, a lot of times they come to this asana just for the ego, right? Just so they can look hot, just so that they can do this fancy pose and post it on Instagram. And that's okay. But at the same time, they're kind of missing the point. And that's what happens to this yoga practice in the West, is that people don't really have this background or this, and they don't really understand why they're doing what they're doing or what the real intention of it is, right? And so this physical practice is to make your body steady, right? Make your body a steady, comfortable home so that you're not fidgeting or distracted when it's time to go inwards. It's not just about flexibility, it's about creating stillness so the mind can become steady too. That's the real intention of yoga practice, right? Of
Beautifully
this
said.
of this of this asana. Yeah, and then the next one, the fourth limb we're on. So this is the fourth limb is okay, the eight limbs, the first half of the limbs are for, us starters who are still acting in the world. This last one is pranayama, this breathing, right? Can I breathe with awareness? This is breath work. And this is where you start to realize that your breath is a bridge between the body and the mind. And when your breath is chaotic, your mind usually is too. So you learn to slow and deepen the breath, right? Your whole nervous system. Your whole nervous system relaxes and the mind can be calm, right? And this is where you make the space for the spiritual focus. And this is when you're ready to go inwards after these four limbs, right? Once these foundations are steady, the yogi is ready to turn inwards into these more subtle limbs of concentration, meditation, and ultimately union with the divine. Okay, but it starts with living with integrity, right? Those yamas, how we interact with the outside world, thinking clearly, these niyamas, how we interact with ourselves, right? Moving mindfully, these yoga asanas, so that this body is a nice, comfortable place so that we can sit and turn inwards. And then breathing with awareness, right? That's what real world yoga looks like. And that's not to say that the other's bad. I mean, these yoga studios are successful for a reason. Like they give people a lot of peace of mind, right? And a lot of kind of awareness of what their mind is doing. Makes their body feel good, makes them feel calmer, makes them more qualified to deal with the problems of their life. Great, that's beautiful. But let's not forget what this system is really for. Right? It's so powerful, and we experience that. But let's not just clip off it's the end of it, right? The end of these limbs, what it's actually for, which is turning inwards, right? And how helpful it can be to deal with our minds so that we can connect with divinity. Because until we deal with our mind, it's going to be the biggest obstacle to connecting with source. Okay, so these first four limbs help us regulate our body, calm our mind, navigate our relationships with more awareness, right? And the beautiful part about these first four limbs of this Ashtanga Yoga practice is that you don't need to leave your home, quit your job, isolate yourself, right? You can do all this while raising a family, going to work, or just moving through daily life. It helps you stay grounded and spiritually connected, no matter what life throws your way. Okay, but then as you move deeper, you come to this fifth limb. That's where we have this fifth limb. Let's see. There we go. Pull it up. Fifth limb. Okay, pratyahara. And this means turning the senses inward. This is when the focus shifts from outside to the inner world. But instead of feeding your senses with external pleasures, you start starving the senses, right? You start starving them of these distractions and temptations. And this often means stepping away from many worldly activities and distractions to focus on your inner self. But again, you have to kind of get qualified to get there, to really reap the benefits. You have to purify yourself before this is really going to be possible. So that's why this is the more advanced stage. And this is what he says in this verse. When you're more advanced, you can turn to these limbs. Okay, so at this point, Krishna says you're you're really moving into this advanced stage where this true renunciation happens. You're not just doing your duties with detachment anymore. You're actually withdrawing from the world to dive deeper inside and connect with the supreme soul in your heart. And that's what's happening here. That's what the Ashtanga yogi is doing, is they're going to start meditating on super soul, on God in the heart. Okay, so just to go over these last four limbs, which are, the more advanced limbs. We just talked about pratyahara, okay, withdrawal of the senses. You start turning inwards. And this is like, as a worldly example, a worldly metaphor, like you can think of like putting your phone on silent and stepping away from the noise, not just physically, but mentally too. It's like your phone's on silent, you're not even thinking about it. You're choosing to stop chasing sensory stimulation and start paying attention to what's going on inside. That's this first step here. Just to kind of, give a worldly metaphor of how we could even start to relate to this in a little bit. It's like everything out there is quiet. Okay, and then we get to this stage of concentration. So now that your senses are quiet, you can begin to focus your mind on one thing, like a mantra, a breath. This is like when you start zooming in with the camera lens, right? The mind is trained to hold steady. Right? You're purified, the mind is trained to hold steady rather than jumping from one thought to another. Okay, so now you can really zoom in and you can start concentrating. And then you get to this meditation. This is what the title of this chapter is, chapter 6, Dhyana. Right? This is sustained, uninterrupted concentration. So it's like the level up to the last one, right? This is like where you can really focus for a period of time, right? And you're not just focusing, you're absorbed. And that's what this is. And then samadhi, the final stage here. This is the spiritual absorption, the union. This is the culmination. Right? A state of deep spiritual realization and union with the divine. This is the ego fades. What remains, it's just pure consciousness and connection. That's what's happening here. And it's not just about peace here either. It's about transcendence. Right? So in bhakti, this would mean complete absorption in loving remembrance of God. Okay, so these final four advanced steps, they gradually unfold as your heart, your mind, your senses become purified through sincere practice. And each step brings you closer to spiritual clarity and inner freedom. Okay, so again, the first four limbs help you get started and stay steady in the world. The next limbs guide you inwards, helping you focus your mind and your senses until eventually you transcend all material distractions. So in these verses, Krishna is teaching us a gradual, practical approach, right? First, discipline your body, your mind, your actions in the world. Then slowly, gently turn your awareness inward to find true freedom and connection. Okay, so this is the Ashtanga practice, the Ashtanga Yoga practice. I just kind of gave an overview of the 8-limb system. And we're going to move on to the fourth verse here. I guess I can continue sharing my screen. We'll do this fourth verse. This will be our final verse for today. And you're ready, Stella?
Okay. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now Krishna is telling us, he's explaining what qualifies someone to be situated in the advanced stages, to get to those final four limbs. And in here, he's describing 3 characteristics. One is the person is no longer pursuing activities to make them happy, right? And they're no longer enjoying worldly activities. And most importantly, they're not even desiring to enjoy. Right? So they're not pursuing, they're not enjoying, they're not desiring. Once you're at this place, then you're qualified for those advanced stages of spiritual practice. So, and it's not about external renunciation, it's this deep inner renunciation. The person has to let go of not just bad actions and indulgences, but even the cravings behind them. So at this point, one has truly entered the advanced stage of yoga. And then in the next verse, Krishna will reveal the biggest obstacle to reaching this stage. Anybody guess? I've talked about it a little bit here. The biggest obstacle to reaching this stage is the mind. This is the mind. because ultimately the entire process of yoga revolves around learning to control and purify the mind. So that's what we're gonna learn a lot of tips and tricks in this chapter to help us purify and control that mind so that we could be better prepared. So the chapter 6 of the Gita, it's like a down-to-earth guide to meditation. And it's covers like the real stuff, like the mind bouncing all over the place, distractions popping up, doubts creeping in, right? Those annoying attachments that keep pulling us back. And Krishna tells us, he says the mind, hey, it isn't easy to control. It loves to wander. But that doesn't mean that we give up. With patience and steady practice, some kindness towards ourselves, we can start to calm that mental chaos. So this chapter helps us get real about the struggles and shows how meditation, it's more about the daily effort than instant perfection. And that's where we're going in this. And this is not to be confused with bhakti. Ashtanga yoga is its own process, but we can use some of these techniques to help us in our bhakti practice. If we're practicing bhakti, and they can be helpful. Because these principles are all the same, or not the principles are not the same, but the principles can be used across different paths, and the goal is all the same. The goal is all the same, to connect with source. Okay, so that is the first 4 verses of chapter 4 or chapter 6. And next class we're going to get into a really good one, to the 5th text. We might even only do that text for the day. So we're really going to start to unpack this nectar that we can get from this chapter. Does anybody want to share anything? Any
I feel like
takeaways?
I've been talking all morning.
Please talk.
Been speaking all morning. I just want to highlight what you were speaking about in terms of intention. How intention is like the cornerstone and foundation of the whole path to enlightenment. Without that deep intention, you can't make it through these steps. Like, however, let me speak for myself. Intention, is the power and the force that's driving my ability to do the external practices, to do the inner work, and to really move to a place where my desire is pure spirit and only that. And then again, going to the everything else being added, but that has to be my deepest intention is to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. And this path also can help you develop that intention, because it's like it promises us this ultimate connection with source, this joyous, it's like the most happiness that you could even experience and we can't even really imagine. It promises us this. And, maybe if we didn't have intention before to not be a jerk because we didn't care enough about ourselves or others, we can kind of understand a little bit more how it fits into the context of what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's not just so that you could be better than other people, or you could, it's not about being good or bad, or it's
That's
about
right.
connecting with source. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So happy you're here, Lisa.
So happy to be here. I've missed you all terribly. I'm just on the road.
Anybody else want to share anything before we leave for the day? Yay, Kay, please share.
Uh, First of all, so happy to see Miss Lisa. And, I have been missing Trevor too.
Aw,
His
yeah.
wisdom, his words. So let him know if you talk to him. And today's class was also, every day, every time it's the nectar and, the discipline of the mind that you talked about, that we have to progress into. We are not there yet. And the second thing, the yogi is somebody who does not have any desires for his pleasure, and his activities are for Krishna. These these couple of things we have to remember every day and try to try to become a yogi.
Hmm. Yes. Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And I'll see you on, gosh, I always forget what date it is. Oh, I'll see you on Monday. See you on Monday. We'll continue our journey through chapter 6. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.